Family loyalty is a fragile illusion that shatters the moment money is on the line. When 26-year-old Alyssa Sullivan found herself disinherited and abandoned on the streets of Boston, she bought a condemned Victorian house out of sheer desperation. What waited inside its rotting attic changed her life forever. Betrayal rarely comes from sworn enemies. It is almost exclusively served on a silver platter by those who claim to love you. Alyssa sat in the mahogany-paneled office of attorney Richard Gable, her hands trembling as they rested in her lap. Her father, Jonathan Sullivan, a prominent Boston real estate developer, had been dead for barely a week following a sudden, inexplicable heart attack. Across the heavy glass desk sat Blair, Jonathan's second wife, dabbing at perfectly dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. Next to her lounged Charles Kensington, Blair's son from a previous marriage, who was currently far more interested in his expensive wristwatch than the proceedings of his stepfather's estate. Attorney Gable cleared his throat, adjusting his reading glasses as he looked down at the thick legal document. Alyssa held her breath. She had spent her entire life working alongside her father, learning the ins and outs of his business, sacrificing her own social life and independent career to help build his legacy. Jonathan had promised her time and time again that the company and the sprawling family estate in Beacon Hill would be hers to manage. Reality, however, had a much crueler script prepared. "To my daughter Alyssa," Richard Gable read, his voice devoid of emotion, "I leave the sum of $15,000 to be paid immediately upon the execution of this will. The remainder of my estate, including all liquid assets, property holdings, and the controlling shares of Sullivan Enterprises, I leave in their entirety to my beloved wife, Blair Sullivan." Silence slammed into the room like a physical weight. Alyssa stared at the attorney, her mind scrambling to process the words. $15,000 from an empire worth over $40 million. It was less than what Blair spent on a single vacation. "There has to be a mistake," Alyssa finally choked out, leaning forward. "My father would never sign that. We had a succession plan in place for 3 years. He drafted it with you, Richard." Blair lowered her handkerchief, a faint, predatory smile touching the corners of her lips. "People change their minds, darling. Your father realized in his final weeks that you simply lacked the fortitude to run an empire. He wanted you to find your own path, without riding on his coattails. He changed the will 3 weeks ago, Alyssa," Richard added softly, unable to meet her eyes. "He came in, signed the new documents, and had them notarized. It is legally binding and ironclad. I am truly sorry." Charles snorted, standing up and buttoning his tailored suit jacket. "Well, if that's all wrapped up, I have a lunch reservation. Oh, and Alyssa, Mother and I expect you out of the Beacon Hill house by sunset. We're having it staged for a magazine shoot tomorrow, and your depressing presence doesn't quite fit the aesthetic." By 6 o'clock that evening, Alyssa stood on the cobblestone pavement of her childhood home with nothing but 2 suitcases and a cashier's check for $15,000. The heavy oak doors had been locked behind her. The security codes had already been changed. The sheer cruelty of the situation paralyzed her for a long moment, but survival instinct eventually took over. She hailed a cab and directed the driver to a cheap, run-down motel in the neighboring town of Lynn. For 3 days, Alyssa sat in a room that smelled faintly of stale cigarette smoke and cheap bleach, staring at the walls. Her bank account was nearly empty outside of her inheritance. If she rented an apartment in the Boston area, first and last month's rent, plus a security deposit, would devour a massive chunk of her funds. She needed an asset. She needed a roof over her head that Blair could never take away from her. Desperation breeds bold, sometimes reckless decisions. On a rainy Tuesday morning, Alyssa found herself sitting in the back row of a municipal tax lien auction in Essex County. The county was auctioning off seized, abandoned, and condemned properties to recover decades of unpaid taxes. Property after property went up on the block, most snatched by aggressive flippers and corporate landlords with deep pockets. Alyssa watched her hopes dwindle until the auctioneer brought up a dilapidated listing in Salem. "Next up, 42 Hawthorne Lane," the auctioneer rattled off, pointing to a grainy, depressing photograph on the projector screen. "Late Victorian build, abandoned for 22 years. Severe cosmetic and likely structural damage. Property is sold entirely as is, sight unseen. Starting bid is $10,000. The room was dead silent. The flippers flipped through their catalogs, disinterested. The property was a notorious local eyesore, once owned by a reclusive and eccentric clockmaker named Arthur Pendleton, who had vanished without a trace in the early 2000s. It was widely considered a money pit. Alyssa raised her numbered paddle. 10,000 to the young lady in the back. Do I hear 11? Silence. Going once, going twice. Sold for $10,000. With taxes and auction fees, the total came to exactly $12,500. Alyssa handed over her cashier's check, signing a stack of convoluted legal documents. In return, a bored county clerk handed her a manila envelope containing the deed and a heavy, tarnished brass key. She had exactly $2,500 left to her name, but she was finally a homeowner. She had a sanctuary, or so she thought. Storm clouds were gathering ominously over the coastal town of Salem when Alyssa's rented compact car pulled onto the dead-end street of Hawthorne Lane. The neighborhood was lined with charming, well-kept historical homes, but number 42 sat at the very end of the cul-de-sac like a rotten tooth. Overgrown, thorny ivy choked the brick chimney and crept over the boarded-up windows. The paint, which might have once been a cheerful pale yellow, had peeled away entirely, leaving the wood siding exposed to the harsh New England elements, rendering it a sickly, bruised gray. The wraparound porch sagged dangerously on one side, and the roof was missing dozens of slate shingles. Alyssa killed the engine and sat in the silence of her car for a long time. The sheer magnitude of her impulsive purchase was settling heavily in her chest. Steeling her nerves, she grabbed her flashlight and the brass key, stepping out into the biting wind. The wooden stairs groaned in loud protest under her boots. She slid the heavy key into the rusted lock of the front door. It required putting her entire body weight against the oak panels to turn the mechanism, but with a sharp crack, the door gave way. The smell hit her instantly, a thick, suffocating wave of rot, damp earth, and something metallic that she couldn't quite identify. Alyssa clicked on her flashlight, sweeping the beam across the grand foyer. Despite the decay, remnants of Arthur Pendleton's eccentric wealth were everywhere. A grand staircase curved upward into the darkness, its banister intricately carved with twisting vines and strange, leering faces. The parlor to the left housed a massive grand piano, buried beneath a moth-eaten canvas tarp. Antique furniture was scattered haphazardly, draped in gray sheets that looked remarkably like ghosts, standing vigil in the gloom. Alyssa spent the first few hours doing a frantic, superficial cleaning of the kitchen and a small downstairs study, deciding to make the study her temporary bedroom. She unrolled a cheap camping mattress on the floor, locked the front door with a heavy padlock she had bought at the hardware store, and tried to sleep. That first night, the house introduced itself. Around 2 in the morning, Alyssa was jolted awake. The air in the study had dropped at least 10 degrees. She lay frozen on her thin mattress, straining her ears. Above her, on the second floor, came the distinct sound of heavy, dragging footsteps. It wasn't the natural settling of an old house. It was methodical. Scrape, thud, scrape, thud. She gripped her flashlight like a weapon, barely breathing until the sun finally broke through the cracks in the boarded windows. Determined not to be chased out of the only property she owned, Alyssa went into town at dawn. She needed someone to check the structural integrity of the house, specifically the second floor where the sounds had originated, terrified that an animal or a squatter had found a way in through the damaged roof. At a local diner, she found a flyer for a general contractor. An hour later, Damien Howard arrived at Hawthorne Lane in a battered pickup truck. Damien was a pragmatic, rugged man in his early 30s with a tool belt slung over his shoulder and a skeptical squint in his eyes as he assessed the rotting porch. "You bought the Pendleton place sight unseen?" Damien asked, letting out a low whistle as he stepped into the foyer. "Lady, you are either incredibly brave or incredibly crazy. Locals cross the street to avoid walking past this lot." "I'm on a very tight budget, Damien," Alyssa replied, leading him toward the grand staircase. "I just need to know if the second floor is going to collapse on my head, and if there are any breaches in the roof where someone or something could get inside." They ascended the creaking stairs together. The second floor was a labyrinth of long hallways and heavily locked doors. Alyssa had to pry the door of the master bedroom open with a crowbar. Inside, the damage was extensive. The ceiling sagged dramatically in the center, water stains blossoming across the plaster like dark bruises. Damien frowned, pulling a laser measuring tool from his belt. He pointed it at the ceiling, then checked the reading. He walked over to the window, opened it with some effort, and leaned out to look at the roofline. Something isn't right here, Damien muttered, furrowing his brow. He walked back to the hallway, measuring the ceiling height there, then pacing out the length of the corridor. What is it? Is it structural failure? Alyssa asked, her heart sinking. No, it's the math, Damien explained, tapping the screen of his device. From the outside, looking at the pitch of the roof and the dormer windows, this house is easily 3 stories tall. There should be a massive attic space up there. But inside, these ceilings are only 9 feet high. The roofline starts at least 12 feet above this ceiling. Alyssa stared at him, confused. So, there's an attic. We just need to find the pull-down stairs or the hatch. I've checked every closet, every hallway ceiling, and every bedroom on this floor, Damien said, his voice dropping into a serious register. There is no hatch. There are no stairs. Whoever built this interior completely sealed off the 3rd floor. It's totally inaccessible from the inside. A chill ran down Alyssa's spine as she remembered the heavy, dragging sounds from the night before. Scrape, thud. If the attic was sealed, what in God's name was moving around up there? They spent the next 2 hours tearing the 2nd floor apart, looking for any hidden access point. It wasn't until they moved a massive, built-in mahogany wardrobe in the dead end of the eastern hallway that they found it. The wardrobe was secured to the wall with heavy iron brackets. When Damien finally unbolted it and they shimmied the heavy furniture forward, they exposed the original plaster wall behind it. Cut directly into the plaster, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it, was a seamless wooden panel roughly the size of a small door. There was no handle, only a small, rusted keyhole. Alyssa retrieved the heavy brass key she had received from the county clerk. Her hands were shaking violently as she slid it into the hidden lock. It clicked loudly. Damien pushed the panel inward. A rush of freezing stale air blew out into the hallway, carrying the overwhelming scent of dried lavender and something profoundly metallic. Damien shined his heavy-duty work light into the opening. Revealed in the harsh beam was a narrow, steep set of wooden stairs, ascending into absolute, suffocating darkness. "Stay behind me," Damien warned, clicking on a second flashlight and handing it to Alyssa. They climbed the stairs slowly, the wooden treads screaming under their weight. As they breached the top of the stairs, Damien swept his light across the vast expanse of the hidden 3rd floor. Alyssa let out a sharp, involuntary gasp, her hands flying to her mouth. The attic was not an empty storage space filled with cobwebs and forgotten junk. It was a sprawling, meticulously clean room, fully illuminated by the natural light bleeding through a massive, hidden skylight on the roof. But it was what was in the center of the room that made Alyssa's blood run cold. Sunlight cascaded through the massive glass skylight, illuminating a breathtaking spectacle of mechanical engineering that completely defied logic. The hidden 3rd floor was not a dusty storage space. It was a colossal, fully functioning horological laboratory and vault. Suspended from the reinforced ceiling beams were hundreds of intricate brass gears, connected by tightly wound steel cables that hummed with kinetic energy. The sheer scale of the room was dizzying, but what commanded their immediate attention was the structure dominating the center of the attic. It was an enormous, cylindrical brass vault, easily 12 feet in diameter, built to resemble the inner workings of a gargantuan grandfather clock. Below it, sliding along a recessed wooden track in the floor, was a massive iron block attached to a thick chain. As the giant gears slowly ticked, the iron block dragged forward an inch, dropped slightly into a notch, and scraped forward again. Scrape. Thud. Scrape. Thud. Alyssa exhaled a shaky breath, the terror of a supernatural haunting instantly replaced by sheer awe. "It's a counterweight," she whispered, stepping closer to the massive track. The house wasn't haunted. The entire building is a structural housing for this machine. Damien walked slowly around the perimeter of the brass cylinder, running his hands over the smooth, cold metal. "I've seen custom panic rooms and high-end security installations for tech billionaires, but nothing like this. This wasn't built to keep something out. It was built to keep something perfectly, flawlessly hidden." Scattered around the perimeter of the room were several drafting tables covered in faded blueprints and leather-bound ledgers. Alyssa approached the nearest desk, her fingers tracing the edge of a heavy, brass-cornered book. The name Arthur Pendleton was embossed on the cover in gold leaf. She opened the ledger. It was not a diary, nor was it a simple accounting book for clock repairs. It was a highly classified client registry. Pendleton had not been a mere eccentric tinkerer. He had been a master concealment architect for the American elite. Flipping through the pages, Alyssa's eyes widened as she recognized names of immense historical and financial weight. There were entries detailing hidden wall safes constructed for the Astor family, a subterranean vault engineered for a private estate owned by Andrew Mellon, and secure, climate-controlled compartments built for the Rockefeller Trust. Then, on the final pages, dated just 4 years ago, a name jumped off the yellowed paper, making her heart stop. Jonathan Sullivan. "Damien, look at this," Alyssa called out, her voice trembling. "My father was a client. He didn't just know Pendleton, he contracted him." Damien shone his flashlight over the entry. Below Jonathan Sullivan's name was a cryptic set of instructions and a list of structural modifications made to the Hawthorne Lane property. Primary modification: sealing of the third-floor stairwell via plaster flush paneling. Security protocol: centrifugal horological lock implemented on the master vault. Trigger mechanism: kinetic resonance unlocking via compound pendulum mass adjustment. He hid something here, Alyssa realized, staring at the towering brass vault. My father knew Blair was going to betray me. He knew she was manipulating him. He must have hidden the real assets in this house. If he did, we have a major problem, Damien said, pointing a laser pointer at the center of the vault where a heavy steel door was welded flush against the brass. There was no keyhole, no electronic keypad, and no dial. Just a small, empty iron bucket hanging from a secondary pendulum chain and a chalkboard bolted to the wall beside it. Alyssa walked over to the chalkboard. Scrawled in chalk that had miraculously survived the years was a note, followed by a complex physics equation. The door yields only to the precise rhythm of time. The centrifugal governor will release the locking pin solely when the physical period of the pendulum achieves absolute resonance. Calculate the necessary mass. Below the note, Pendleton had written a complex formula for the period of a physical pendulum. T equal to pi, SQRT, frac, I, MGL, CM, where $I is the moment of inertia, $M is the total mass of the pendulum, $G is the acceleration due to gravity, and $L, cm. Dollar is the distance from the pivot to the center of mass. Next to the equation were specific variables. A required period, $T, $A, of exactly 4.2 seconds. A moment of inertia, $I, $A, factored by the existing brass arm and the current baseline mass. "It's a cipher lock based on Newtonian physics," Damien muttered, his engineering background kicking in. He pulled a heavy-duty calculator from his tool bag. "The mainspring inside the vault is ticking at a specific frequency. If we put the wrong weight in that hanging bucket, the pendulum swings too fast or too slow. The internal governor will seize, and the vault permanently locks down." "Can you solve it?" Alyssa asked, gripping the edge of the drafting table. Damien didn't answer immediately. He stared at the board, punching numbers rapidly into his device. "The length of the pendulum arm is fixed. Gravity is fixed. We need to find the exact mass, $M, miners required to make the period exactly 4.2 seconds, based on his moment of inertia calculations." He scribbled a few numbers in the dust on the desk. "We need exactly 14.6 kilograms of additional weight in that bucket." Alyssa immediately began scouring the room. Underneath one of the workbenches, she found a wooden crate filled with standardized brass calibration weights, each clearly stamped with their mass in kilograms. Together, they carefully carried the weights to the hanging iron bucket. Damien placed a 10 kilogram weight inside, then a 2 kilogram weight, a second 2 kilogram weight. Finally, he found a smaller weight, stamped 0.6 kilograms, and gently lowered it into the bucket. The moment the final weight settled, the heavy iron chain groaned. Deep inside the brass cylinder, a profound metallic shifting echoed through the attic. The ticking of the massive gears suddenly changed tempo, falling into a deep, rhythmic, echoing heartbeat. Click, clack, whir. A loud hiss of depressurizing air blasted from the seams of the steel door. The massive circular hatch, weighing easily 1,000 pounds, smoothly swung open on hydraulic hinges, revealing the dark interior of the master vault. Alyssa stepped into the vault, the beam of her flashlight cutting through the stale, lavender-scented air. The interior was lined with polished mahogany shelves, looking more like an executive boardroom than a safe. In the center of the room sat a single, beautifully carved oak desk. On top of it rested a heavy canvas duffel bag, a sleek modern hard drive, and a thick, cream-colored envelope bearing the crimson wax seal of Sullivan Enterprises. With shaking hands, Alyssa broke the wax seal and unfolded the heavy parchment. My dearest Alyssa, if you are reading this, my contingency plan was successful, and my faith in your resourcefulness was well placed. I am deeply sorry for the pain the reading of my public will undoubtedly cause you. 6 months ago, I discovered that Blair and Charles were heavily involved with a violent offshore gambling syndicate. Charles had leveraged Sullivan Enterprises properties as collateral for his debts, and Blair had been systematically forging my signature to embezzle millions into untraceable shell corporations. Confronting them directly would have put your life in grave danger, so I played the fool. I allowed her to believe she had won. I let her force my hand in drafting a new will, granting her the entirety of Sullivan Enterprises and the Beacon Hill estate. What Blair does not know is that over the last 4 months, I initiated a quiet, legal corporate restructuring. I transferred every liquid asset, every patent, and every controlling stock certificate out of the primary company and into an anonymous holding firm named Hawthorne Trust. I legally gutted Sullivan Enterprises from the inside out. Blair has inherited an empty, heavily indebted shell. I purchased this property under the Hawthorne Trust years ago through my old friend Arthur Pendleton. By allowing the property taxes to lapse, I knew the house would go to a municipal lien auction. I mandated Richard Gable leave you exactly $15,000, the precise estimated cost to win an uncontested tax auction in this county. I knew your pragmatic, brilliant mind would seek immediate shelter and a solid asset. By purchasing the deed to 42 Hawthorne Lane, you became the sole legal proprietor of the Hawthorne Trust. Everything I truly built belongs to you. Use the contents of this vault to destroy them. Take back our legacy. With all my love, Dad. Tears streamed down Alyssa's face, splashing onto the heavy parchment. The betrayal that had threatened to break her had been a meticulously orchestrated illusion to save her. She wiped her eyes, a fierce, burning determination igniting in her chest. She turned to the canvas bag and the hard drive. They spent the next hour documenting the contents of the master vault. Item description. Estimated value. Significance. Bearer bonds, municipal, $12,500,000, untraceable, instantly liquid. Sullivan Enterprises controlling shares. 51% ownership transferred to Hawthorne Trust. Encrypted hard drive, photographic and wire transfer evidence of Blair's embezzlement. Vintage Patek Philippe pocket watch. Personal heirloom of Jonathan Sullivan. You didn't just buy a house, Alyssa, Damien said, looking at the staggering inventory laid out on the desk. You bought an absolute war chest. And now, Alyssa replied, her voice turning to cold steel, I'm going to war. The following Monday morning, Blair Sullivan hosted a lavish brunch at the Beacon Hill estate, celebrating her newfound status as the undisputed matriarch of Boston real estate. Caterers moved seamlessly through the manicured gardens, serving champagne to city council members and wealthy socialites. The serene atmosphere was abruptly shattered when 3 black SUVs tore up the circular driveway, tires crunching aggressively over the imported gravel. Alyssa stepped out of the lead vehicle. She was not the defeated, weeping girl they had thrown onto the streets the week prior. She wore a razor-sharp charcoal power suit, her posture radiating absolute authority. Flanking her was William Danforth, the most ruthless and feared corporate litigator in New England, along with 2 federal agents from the FBI's white-collar crime division. Blair dropped her champagne flute, the crystals shattering on the patio stones. Charles froze, a terrified pallor washing over his face. Alyssa? Blair stammered, attempting to maintain her composure as the guests fell dead silent. What is the meaning of this? You are trespassing on private property. Actually, Blair, this property belongs to Sullivan Enterprises, Alyssa said loudly, her voice carrying over the murmuring crowd. And as of 9 o'clock this morning, the Hawthorne Trust has executed its right as the 51% majority shareholder to liquidate the company's remaining assets. William Danforth stepped forward, handing a thick stack of legal filings to a stunned Charles. Furthermore, Danforth announced, we have turned over definitive forensic evidence of systemic wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to defraud a corporate entity to the federal authorities. The FBI has already frozen all of your personal bank accounts, Mrs. Sullivan, you're lying, Blair hissed, her polished facade completely crumbling into panic. Jonathan left everything to me. It was ironclad. He left you a sinking ship, Blair, Alyssa said, stepping inches from her stepmother's face. And you're going down with it. As the federal agents stepped forward to escort a screaming Blair and a sobbing Charles off the premises, Alyssa stood on the patio of her childhood home, watching justice unfold. She had reclaimed her empire, entirely on her own terms. 6 months later, Alyssa officially took over the newly rebranded Hawthorne Holdings. Under her sharp, visionary leadership, the company reached unprecedented heights. She sold the Beacon Hill mansion, choosing instead to live permanently in Salem. With Damian Howard appointed as the head of her new architectural development wing, they spent over $2 million, restoring 40 Hawthorne Lane to its former Victorian glory. They left the grand pendulum in the attic entirely untouched, a rhythmic beating heart of brass and steel, standing as a permanent monument to a father's genius and a daughter's unyielding resilience. If you were captivated by Alyssa's journey from a disinherited daughter to the master of a hidden empire, make sure to hit that like button. We release thrilling, real-life mystery stories just like this one every single week. Don't forget to share this video with your friends who love a good plot twist, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss an episode. Drop a comment below. What would you do if you found a secret vault?